and I believe it is true, that procurement chose me. And before I even start with what I'm about to talk about, just to break the ice with everyone, I had a conversation with a colleague yesterday who was frustrated about how procurement professionals are being treated. And she says, why is corporate so hard when you're in procurement? And I said to this person, it's because everybody thinks they can do what we do with very little understanding. The topic today, or the theme, is it begins with unlocking the true value of procurement. And we want to look at that in terms of best practice. Join us. I think we often think that procurement is a, when people are saying it's sourcing, and you look at it from a sourcing, and yet procurement in essence presents the entire organization with what we call a governance process. And that is where, at the heart of every organization, the issue of ethics really, and compliance comes in. What would an organization be without a governance process? And if one understood what that meant, you would then be able to see some of the aspects within procurement that would drive the organization and enable it to function smoothly. To start off with, procurement is the one department that brings everybody in one room. While we may be called a support service, if you put together your cross-functional team, that's where you get to find your finance people, who actually, I think we would know that from a controls perspective are quite strong. So you get to have that support. If you then look at procurement, and then we drive the legal compliance as well, then you would have a legal person who assists us in drafting the contract. You have your end users that may come from different organizations or from different spaces, as it were. Now, within what we're calling this cross-functional team, there begins to be something that needs to happen as you start. There needs to be trust amongst the members. Because what we tend to do there, we are discussing a specification, which is something that must sit within the boundaries of the team that is here. Within the specification, the team must begin to discuss the evaluation criteria that will be used and agree. Because you've got different stakeholders here. You've got economic development, you've got enterprise development, finance, you've got different various disciplines within that. Now, without trust, the team can never really function properly. So you need to, because it starts with the issue of ethics does not begin when you join procurement or when you get into a cross-functional team. It really begins with when you enter into an organization, because when you start in an organization, we sign what we call code of ethics. We sign different standards. Now, those, they need to be lived. And as a procurement professional, they become your reputation. So you start there with a trust and a reputation. So when you begin as a team to work towards a common ground, which is the acquisition of either a product or the acquisition of services, everybody else must agree, and must agree that what happens in this room stays in this room. It really starts there. So the issue of ethical procurement and the way that we practice it, it starts with the small thing of trust and reputation. Because when you are within one team in one room, there must be that. And often we then have to sign what we call a declaration. And when you declare, it is important, we were discussing it earlier today in one of our meetings, the issue of declarations. And I think it is important that when you put together your cross-functional team, they also have to understand what that means and the conflict that it presents if that is not declared. I'll move then to supplier relationships. Each organization has, again, a supplier form that you give to them. And key to that is the issue of ethics and compliance. What do you do if you find yourself in a situation where that particular supplier, number one, most procurement professionals, we work with different suppliers. There's a difference between putting forward a supplier or a service provider that you know can do the work, or a service provider that you are conflicted with. And the third point that we need to find ourselves in a situation where, when you as a procurement professional are putting forward a service provider or a supplier, I'm going to use SIFs for an example. If they were to say, which professional body would you recommend? And I could then say SIFs. I need to be able to say why SIFs. And the objectives and the supporting there must be an objective view of why you are putting that forward. And we need to stay away from subjectivity, because subjectivity can compromise us. So it is important for all procurement professionals, public sector, private sector, it really doesn't matter. As long as you are in procurement, you need to be a trusted person. You need to have a good reputation. And the supplier relationship that you have must be based on the conduct that is outlined in the contract, must be based on transparency, and must be based on the service level agreement that you may have had. All right. It does happen now and again that there are certain risks that you have to find, right? Risk could come, as an example, the one that I just used now, that you've proposed a company, and you are more than welcome as a procurement professional, by the way, colleagues, to recuse yourself if you feel there may be a slight conflict. Best practice have found that when you disclose and you recuse yourself and you allow the process to unfold, you save the organization from being dragged into a whole lot of situations, because, as we know, procurement professionals are known across organizations, across companies, and across suppliers. And should it be, because we also are human beings, correct? We also go into malls, we go into churches, we go into sports games, and we have families, etc., etc. And if there's a slight conflict that may compromise yourself, it needs to be disclosed. Rather, allow your compliance department to then say or guide you in terms of how or evaluate the risk that you have disclosed that you may feel that can compromise the acquisition process or the tender process, or that can compromise the organization, or that has a potential of compromising yourself. The other part that I'm not going to talk the long for the whole time, I'm just going to touch on two. In terms of the other issue that we look at from an ethical procurement perspective is the issue of competitive advantage, right? So where we are looking at the different stakeholders and how we ensure the sustainability of what we do and our stakeholders, it is important that we do proper benchmarks. And I think strategic sourcing has taught us a couple of things, because if we are talking best practice, whatever we do is based on certain models that we apply. And all of those models must have a base. So when we are looking at the different baselines that we look at from what the market dictates, it is important that as the basis of where we're starting, we understand and we share that with everyone, or we develop that as a cross-functional team in that what is our base that would enable us to look at the competitiveness of our suppliers, the competitiveness of our process, the fairness of our process, etc., etc. Now, the last part that I'm going to talk about is the moral compass of the organization that we are working for. By one process, by one person who has done something wrong, the entire organization stands to lose a lot, just from one person. And I think we've seen that as different individuals in different countries, and with the slightest of errors. So colleagues, without belaboring the point, how we apply ourselves, how we conduct ourselves, how we present ourselves in public, privately, how we present ourselves at work, how we present ourselves in the work that we do, it then determines where the organization we work for would be rated from a moral perspective, from an ethical perspective, and also how ourselves are trusted by the colleagues that we work with. That's a very important question. I think there's two things that I want to touch on. We currently, in my environment, the processes are very elaborate. So in terms of disclosure, the cross-functional team must disclose, number one, their interest if they have any, and they need to disclose it if they are conflicted or not. That's one. Two, there's also, if you think that you will never be caught, because post that there's a due diligence that we get to do, and the due diligence is very also elaborate in that it goes so deep and detailed into the organization that is being proposed and its directors, current and former. So the tools or the technology that is currently out there to test the disclosure, I think it's effective, and I've seen its effectiveness and I've seen its efficiency. It's how it can assist in terms of compliance in my current environment and in my old environment where I used to be before I joined Gibela. It's the paperwork that is filed. Number one, we do two things. We record in terms of our bid processes, the whole process, and we do that so that if somebody wants to take us to task and there was an error perhaps in the minutes that we've approved and we omitted something, then we can go back there and we can then do a quick recollection. So the paperwork helps in the first front of saying, did anyone or everybody else declared? And then it's noted there. So that is one thing that we have not missed. That we have not missed. And I saw in my previous environment, even within the committee, you always have to ensure that you have somebody that represents the compliance department who is an independent from the cross-functional team or the adjudication team or the executive team that that decides on the recommendation that is being presented. So it has worked. It has.
If we put into action or into practice, or if we apply contract management best practices, the irregular expenditures, fruitless and wasteful expenditures, and any other losses can be eliminated, reduced, or even avoided. And when that has been achieved, you'll find that an entity or a government department or any other form of establishment will obtain a clean audit. So I was able to contribute towards the achievement of a clean audit by that particular entity, Northwest Gambling Board, because I cleared up the contract, procurement, and supply chain management, because that's where most problems are. And each and every entity, a company, department, or any form of business, if it cannot unlock the true value of procurement, it will not be able to achieve a clean audit or to be considered as doing the right thing. Why do I say so? Because the true value of procurement is that they should be able to, any entity to get to do things right it will have to be able to monitor its expenditures. It has to be able to ensure that everything which is being done is ethical and is in line with legislation. Maybe from a background point of view, as I enter into my presentation, is that when we talk of a contract, where do we begin? Contract does not start at the time when it is being signed. It starts from planning, and the planning will include the drafting of specification. As Colette Nyanda has indicated, specification which will have to be cross-functional. Then ethics are there, disclosures and so on. Then the terms of reference and the specifications. That's where a contract actually is beginning. Because when you go to writing the contract with the successful bidder or the supplier to be contracted, you have to take in consideration that which you have indicated. Of course, you'll get into detail, but you do not have to contradict that which you have advertised to the public. Now, planning, of course, will include budgeting, and then we go on to creation of the contract. That's when all the documents are looked into, and then we went on to collaboration, that is negotiation. Parties sit down to negotiate what's the best that they can enter into. Then we went on to execution, that's signing, then administration, and then close out. Once the contract has been closed out, then there should not be any other purchase under that contract, otherwise it will be irregular. Let me get to the discussion now in terms of my presentation. The first contract management best practice, which I would like to share with you, is this one. Establish a fully fledged contract management structure, assigning roles and responsibilities, and training and developing officials. For each and every establishment or organization, there should be contract management structure, wherein there should be officials that are working there. Can be a manager for that contract management structure. There can be a contract administrator. There can be various roles, and responsibility should be assigned there. For example, we may have a head of contract management division that will be responsible, among others, maybe to make policies. Then there will be contract administrator who will also be responsible for ensuring that every agreed upon terms and conditions of a contract are complied with. Now, all this should from time to time be trained so that they keep themselves updated with the latest developments in contract management. Then there should be sharing of information in the structure, and of course, whatever various divisions in the company would like to have, then they will have to contract that particular officials in the structure. Now, structure, once it is there, we are saying it is a best practice to have the structure, because we will be knowing where we have to go to when there are matters of contract. Without a fully fledged contract management structure, then a best practice will be difficult to achieve. Then we go to number 2, ensuring compliance with laws and regulations and terms and conditions of contract itself. Now, every contract that we have, you will find that there are terms and conditions that would have been agreed to by the contracted supplier and also the client of that particular supplier. There are parties, both are the parties, right? Part is the contracted supplier, and then 2 is the organization that needs the service or goods or works or projects of that supplier that is going to contract. So there are terms and conditions that must be there. When they are there, these terms and conditions, then that contract is a best practice, or rather it's in line with best practice, because it cannot just go in where it would not know where we are going to, or what is it that is directing or governing that particular contract. So the terms and the conditions will govern that particular contract. And the terms and conditions, we all know, we hear about that. Now, the terms and conditions are vital, meaning that once they are broken, then any part of the contract may then go to, may cancel because it's essential, or rather may still seek remedies instead of canceling. Now, we also have laws and regulations. Every country has got its own laws and regulations that govern particular contracts. Say, for example, we have got engineering contract. So that means that if you're in South Africa, the Engineering Council of South Africa has got the rules and regulations that how those particular kinds of contracts should be governed or have to be entered into, and how everything should be implemented and which documents must be completed so that all the parties or stakeholders with those contracts can get access to the documents and then feel comfortable with what was done. Now, how then do we ensure this compliance? We can ensure compliance with laws and regulation terms and conditions of contract, one, by developing and implementing policies, the contract management policy, and then we developed the processes and procedures. And in so doing, then we are able to show compliance, because these are the documents which will crisscross to each other. The legislation which you want to comply with and the terms and conditions will have to be indicated. They must crisscross and not conflict the policy and not conflict with any compliance checklist. So when we have this, then we will be able to ensure compliance. At number 3, we'll have digitalization of the contract management system. We know that we are in the world of technology now. We are doing away with documents. We are going green. We are doing our best to minimize as much as possible. So now, when you have digitalized the contract management system, it means that if somebody wants to procure, let's say the end user, let's say the end user department is the human resource department. It has got a contract wherein a certain supplier, say for example, is rendering employee wellness program. That particular end user, then when the contract is started, will be aware. And then when there are services that the contractor or the contracted supplier has rendered, then it will submit the invoice. The invoice will be loaded. And when it has been loaded and the purchase order has already been created and the supplier has been paid, then the system itself, because it has been digitalized, it should be able to tell how much is outstanding and how much has been used. Let's say, for example, it was a contract of 1 million rand. Then if the human resource department has rendered services up to 500,000 rand, then any other services which are needed later then can still be attended to up to 500,000 rand, because that is the balance. 1 million of the contract amount less 500,000 rand will remain with 5,000 rand. And then when that has been done, then we are left with 500,000 rand. Once the whole 1 million rand has been used, then because the system is digitalized, it will indicate to say 1 million rand has already been exhausted. The same applies. Before that 1 million rand can be reached, when any new other purchase order has to be created in that particular contract, it will give warning to say contract has to be exhausted. It will indicate the amount that is remaining. Then if the purchase order to be does not exceed the remaining or available budget in that contract, then it is allowed to proceed. If it has already been exceeded, then it will indicate, say, budget check, the amount has been exceeded. It will also indicate by how much is exceeded. Now, what then will it be done? Then they will have to go to the next function, the financial management function under budget management section, to be able to get funds. Let's say, for example, it has been exceeded by, say, 200,000 rand. Then they will go there and bring funds to the system. Then, because the system is digitalized, those of budget section, once they've transferred or do the payment of funds to the human resource account, then funds will be available. And then those in supply chain management, when they create the purchase order, the system will be able to get information and allow them to go through. That becomes possible when it is digitalized and it has been well programmed to work correctly. Number 4, the value of creating and maintaining the repository and streaming procurement process. Now, the next contract management best practice is that there must be a creation and maintenance of contract repository and streamlining of procurement processes. Now, this links also to the digitalized contract management system as follows. The contract depository will be as follows. We will have the contracted supplier. We will have the amount that has been budgeted and allocated to that particular supplier. And of course, we'll have got the description as to under what services or goods are we having this contract. Now, we'll also have the duration of the contract. So that is to guard against in terms of exceeding the period, because period also does not have to be exceeded. So now once we have this contract repository, it should be linked to the budget management section, so that when funds are going, then when they are doing the budget, when they indicate, they allocate budget, whatever will have been requested, it is updating. It will update information of IT if there is an IT contract that is being used. It will update the contract information of human resource when the human resource contract is being utilized. So all the information, the types of contract, the amount that has been allocated, and any other information will be available on the contract repository. And any action that is taken in the procurement arena and processes, which then comes to the system, will be able to be updated there in the contract repository. Then we can go to the next contract management best practice: monitoring and managing of expenses and contracted supplier performance. Now, as I've already indicated, we have got the expenses as and when the contract, as I give example by human resource or IT. When you are spending, you should be able to monitor that you don't exceed the budget. And also, you should ensure that you spend in the allocated period, let's say 1 year. We don't want it to have a situation where in the budget is not spent. So, to be in a best practice, check all the contracts that you're having to check if you are not spending. If you are not spending, you find that at the end of the day, you surrender money back to where it comes from. For example, we have recently millions that has been surrendered to the National Treasury of South Africa because the department has failed to spend. That is a disgrace to have a situation wherein there are those that need funds. Let's say, for an example, a National Financial Aid Scheme of South Africa. We know that there have been some issues in terms of funds. Funds were there. Students needed funds, but could not get the funds because you find that the funds have not been allocated to students. And then those are some of the things that, but if there is somebody who is monitoring and managing expenses, and then we'll be able to check, okay, the funds were like this. They were not spent on this, so this should have been spent. Now, we go to the terms. Terms, I indicate that they can be managed or administered by the contract administrator, who will be the one to monitor compliance with all the terms. The terms, one of the terms that we know, maybe payment terms. The contracted supplier would have agreed in the terms of contract to say, maybe it would like to be paid 2 weeks after it has submitted the invoice, then it means that it will be expecting funds after they submitted the invoice just 2 weeks later. Then now, if that term is breached, if it is not paid within 2 weeks, of course, the client should inform the supplier to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then that would have been in an agreement in the terms to say, in case payments are not made as agreed, what will be the remedy to the breached or to the wronged party, which is the supplier. Now, there can be penalties, or there can be any agreement which can be reached. So it will depend on the two parties as to what did they agree in their terms. Then now we also have got the supplier performance, which have to be monitored and managed. Now, what do we manage this with? One, we manage them by the specification terms of reference that we have. And two, we manage them by the contract itself, which is either in the form of a lease agreement, service level agreement, goods delivery agreement, or any other form of the agreement that is governing that particular contract. And then again, we will also have to monitor and manage the contracted supplier performance through the key performance indicators. The key performance indicators will have, for example, we could have on-time delivery as a key performance indicator, wherein if the contracted supplier does not deliver on time, what next must be done? Those will also be forming part of the terms as to what must be done. The issue should not be to fight each other unnecessarily. These are the parties in the agreement. So once one breached the contract or one could not do as expected, there will always be a reason. For an example, let's supplier may fail to deliver goods at a particular time. Let's say, for example, it's a contract to deliver some bricks at point A, say it's to deliver bricks at Soweto in South Africa, then it failed to deliver. It could be that on the roads that it's supposed to go through, there is a strike. Obviously, the client of that supplier who is to deliver bricks should understand, oh, the supplier could not be able to deliver bricks because there is a strike somewhere on the way. That should be understood and should not be an issue. So the on-time delivery of bricks will not be possible because of what? Of the strike, or the rain poured and the bridge was swept away. There are floods, as we know. So those are some of the things that can make delivery not to be on time. And the key performance indicator would have not been achieved because of that. So those are the things that must be looked into and agreed in the terms of contract. So the terms of contract that can deal with that, those that are beyond the ability of the contractor, they would fall under the force majeure, meaning something which is an act of God, something which is beyond the control of either the supplier or the client of the supplier. So both parties to that contract do not have control of that. Then the next contract management best practice that we should have is supplier relationship. This unlocks also the endless value of procurement as follows. We know that relationship is the most important activity that we should have. And once we have it in place, we have to show that we manage it. Like I indicated, we can best manage it by saying, when something has been breached, be able to listen to the party, the contract, as to what happened. When something didn't happen as expected, it does not harm anyone to take a call to say, this and this is happening. Then as parties to the contract, then you discuss and reach amicable solution. That is what builds the relationship. If there is something, discuss it. Do not rush to open a case. If you, for an example, just if you are in a contract of delivery of bricks, as I've indicated, maybe there is a strike and then one fails to deliver the bricks at expected place of the client, like Soweto, for an example. then it will be wrong and very much wrong of the client when the delivery of the bricks just get delayed by 1 hour or 30 minutes or so. Then that client rush to the police station to open a case to say bricks was not delivered. It's not correct. That doesn't build a relationship, because if a contracted supplier fails to deliver the bricks on time and then the client rushes to the police station, next time that client may not be attended to well by this contractor, because this contracted supplier have found a client who is difficult. You don't have to be difficult. If there are issues, parties to the contract should sit down and discuss and find solution. It becomes contract management best practice to be able to sit down and discuss the matters. Then the last contract management best practice, which I'd like to share with you, which is a cornerstone in unlocking the true value of procurement, is planning and forecasting. I've indicated that planning and forecasting, these are the two things that goes together in that. When you plan, you indicate that from this time to this time, what is it that you will have done? And again, you will indicate that your contract, you will indicate to say the issues of advertisement to the public, when will it take place, when it will close, evaluation, and who are those that will evaluate. And then when the real contract starts, that you should also be able to plan to say your contract is going to start at this time. And then when do you expect it to have started, and when do you expect to have ended? Now, when it comes to planning, I indicate that you should also have to plan how are you going to fund it, how much is it going to be. Now, even planning also has to be done with the contracted supplier, not only the client. The client will do it separately, and then the client may also do, the contracted supplier may also do its own planning as to how it is going to make things happen. But now, once the contract is to be started, they sit down, both the client and the contracted supplier, they sit down and indicate how they want the contract to be. And of course, that should be in line with what has been advertised in the terms of reference and the specification. And when they do everything in agreement, when they plan and forecast, then they should be able to look into that. For an example, if it's a 1-year contract, both the client and the contracted supplier would have forecasted to say, in the first 6 months, let's say it's a 1 million contract, they can say that in the first 6 months, 500,000 rand should have been spent. Then they forecast the amount of 500,000 rand would have been spent of that 1 million rand. So having done that, then we expect certain delivery to have been made. And if not, then they still have to sit down and reconcile the difference so that they are on contract in line with what they've planned and forecasted. Then in so doing, that will lead to the contract being done according to expectations. And of course, out of that, for you as the owner of the contract, you will be able to unlock the true value of procurement. All this because contract is a part of procurement in addition to sourcing and in addition to purchasing management. Those are the 3 core of procurement, and they work together, they collaborate and get integrated to find out the true value of procurement. Thank you.
Yes. And I will just briefly touch on the SIPS ethics test. Now, this is a benefit that many all of our members have, but only a few people really use it. And this is really a tangible commitment to you and your ethics and integrity, as Colette had mentioned earlier. And that really is something you can have it in your office, print out, and show your commitment and dedication to ethics. It's not at a fee. You just take that for free on the SIPS website. My dashboard, there we go. There's this portion here which says my learning. Okay, you click on this. This is when you are going on path to completing your SIPS ethics test, which has CPD points, the continuous professional development points, which you need to complete annually. Again, even if you're MSIPs, you need to do these so that you can move from MSIPs to FSIPs and also contribute with your wealth of knowledge and experience when we have these sessions. Again, after you clicked on that, My Learnings, this is what you'll find. And this essentially is the ethics test. But you just click on this here button. It takes you to the ethics test. I would urge everyone, even if you're not in the field, you're studying, this is some good knowledge and it underpins the importance of ethics in everything that we do in supply chain. And these are some of the topics that you'll have to cover. And again, after this, you do get a certificate and it does load and contribute to your CPD points.
It's a partnership. So it really begins with that. And when we have a proper contract management system, as we have heard, and we are implementing everything well, it makes the conversation much easier. Let me make an example. What we've started doing, we started 2 years ago here with a project called Value Capture. So what value capture means is that you go to the suppliers that you've partnered with and you're saying, okay, I'm looking for innovation, I'm looking for cost savings, what can we do? Then they look at what they're supplying you and then they come to you and you're saying, okay, fine. Can you bring our engineering team with yours and let's see what we can do. Over and above that, what we are also doing here is that we've got certain aspects of the products that we are procuring that we are challenged with. So we go to some suppliers and we're saying, you know what, you've got a very good research and development program. Can we partner with you? And if you look at that, it's not only about the benefit of the product or the benefit of the service, it's also a benefit to the employees, as it were, because then I'm now taking our engineering team to their engineering team. There's an exchange of ideas there that really takes place. And it also talks to the issue of developing a co-owned IP. So all of these things must be done within a framework of transparency, and the value proposition to which you want to do this must be explained, and everyone must sign on the dotted line. But it starts really with how you treat your suppliers. Do you treat them as, I want this from you, or do you treat them as your partners? Do they see you as a partner as well, or they don't? So it's build a strong relationship with them, that they don't see you as just a transaction, but they see you as one to whom they can have a long-lasting relationship with. It also talks to the sustainability of suppliers, as it were, because it's not really about one thing, but it's the continuity of the things that we do within our value chains. Thanks, Dolly.
It's possible for a digitalized system to prioritize the budget that is available. And this lies with the expertise of the IT institution or a company that has been awarded the tender or the responsibility, or that has been entrusted with the responsibility to digitalize that particular system or to provide the software for that particular organization that will be using that particular system. Then it is the institution responsibility to ensure that it indicates how the system should prioritize the budget available in case wherein there will be a competition for resources that are available, budget resources that are available. For an example, the organization may say, in case the competition for the available budgetary resources, priority should be given first to operations of that organization. And then 2, it should be given to the support departments. Let us give, for an example, for Robben Island Museums, the operations will include a division that transport or ferry with a boat. The visitors will be going to Robben Island. So it means that when there is a service provider that has to be paid with the budget that is available, and that service provider, say, is the owner of a boat that transport visitors that are moving from Nelson Mandela Gateway Point to Robben Island itself to see the prisons where Nelson Mandela was. So that invoice, because it's under operations, the mandate of that entity, Robben Island Museum, then payment then will have to be prioritized to go to that divisions, visitors operations, so that we don't have a situation wherein people, when you arrive, you find that that supplier was supposed to provide boat is not paid and didn't make the boat available. We don't want to disappoint anyone who wants to go to Robben Island to see where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. We don't want to disappoint. So the system will have to prioritize the budget meant for the ferry of what? Of visitors to go to Robben Island Museum. The issue is, usually the budget resources, they are prioritized per the mandate of the existence of the entity. That is in the government sector. Now, in the case of a private sector, the budget will, of course, will have been prioritized for the core business that has made that company to exist. If it is a company that is, let's say it's a logistics company that has to transport maybe goods from Durban to Malawi, then it means that that company has to ensure that any amount that has to be paid to the driver, for example, is available. They don't have to be on strike drivers. They must be taken care of so that goods can be delivered to Malawi from Durban. So priority goes for the budget, goes by what the mandate is and what the business of the company is, be it in the private sector or in the public sector. The mandate and the mission and the reason for the existence of that particular business is the one that has been prioritized. However, budget from start are prioritized or are made per the programs or per divisions. There will be a budget allocated to IT. Say for that 10 million is allocated to IT only, and then another 10 million is allocated to finance, another 10 million is allocated to human resources. So it means that when there is a contracted supplier who has to be paid, who is under human resources, then the system will take funds only from human resource. If the supplier which has to be paid is contracted under finance division, the system, when it has to be, the invoice has to be paid, it will take only from finance. So there is that categories of how funds have been distributed. So the system would have been programmed to work in a way that the entity has wanted it to be. That is to say, first of all, budget must be utilized for what it has been allocated for, so that each and every division is able to manage its own budget, so that there is no underspending or overspending, or you find that we don't want a situation wherein IT budget has been utilized by finance budget. It's wrong. Every division has got its own budget, and the digitalized system, if it is correctly programmed, when there is a purchase order, it must make commitment against the budget of that particular division. If it's not well programmed, that's when there is a commitment to IT department, and then you find it is making commitment to human resource. So that system is not well programmed. So a well-programmed system which is running and or functioning properly should be able to take funds from where it is supposed to. And in the case wherein there is no budget, funds must first be transferred or viamented from one program to the other, as I have explained in terms of authorization, so that the system can be able to take where it is supposed to be. Or in the case wherein a system it's somehow not having budget which has been distributed and allocated per divisions, that's when maybe it can be said to say, take in this priority. All this has to be programmed, and then the system will respond. And this system, once it is digitalized, it also has to be maintained and supported so that it works in accordance to what it has been made for and in accordance to expectations. Question, and this question I could not be able to answer it if I have not been an MSIPS, if I was not a member of MSIPS, and it will be very much difficult for me to respond. To respond, due to the knowledge that I've gained from a Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, I like to say, under the course which I've studied, leadership in procurement and supply, then the response is this. You have to have a proactive manager and a leader of contract management to be able to resolve that particular problem. The part of the contract management framework that you use, framework will be made of legislations, policies, and so on. So the part that you can use, because there is a law which is above everything, and changes in the laws and do not just necessarily be made in a short space of time. So what you will use here, or what a proactive leader or manager will use, will have to make use of a process and procedure manual, so that that process and procedure manual can then be able to respond to any emerging risk. And once it has been identified, to be eliminated or reduced or mitigated, then in line with the risk management unit, the process and procedure manual has to respond to that. A proactive leader or a proactive manager will be able to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Fatu. There is another question here which says, how can organizations effectively manage and mitigate the risks associated with contracts variation and changes, particularly in long-term contracts where market conditions and organizational needs may evolve? If you can quickly, briefly respond to that, we really now pressed for time. Thanks.
Can you just briefly summarize the question?
How can organizations effectively manage and mitigate risks associated with contract variations and changes, in particular to long-term contracts where market conditions and organizational needs may evolve? So in my understanding is that, how do you manage or mitigate the risks which relate to organizational needs on a long-term contract? You find that the scope creeps, the scope that then comes in, which is unavoidable, but then you still need to be compliant in terms of that. So if you can respond, and then I see Colette's hand is up, maybe she wants to add to that as well. So briefly, Fatu, touch on the response, or we can let Colette respond to that.
Okay. She will add where I've left up something. Yeah, what becomes best there is to mitigate that particular risk. I've indicated that is the terms of the delegation of authority, which provides as to who authorizes the expansion or the variation. Then we know very well that some other projects are difficult. Then we also have to make sure that we make our policies to cater for flexibility, and also our process and procedure to cater for flexibility. So the delegation of authority in terms of approval, and most of the activities to sit down and discuss to see what is the main problem. I will request a Coletta to add where I have left out some information. Thank you.
Okay, Colette.
Thanks. In summary, I think you've covered most of the things that I would have actually said as well. Most of the time, these creeps are end user, lack of understanding what they're buying. So I think it's also important to have a clear specification which leads to a service level agreement. And then all of that needs to be governed by a variation form, because most contracts, if you put them in place, you have to have parameters to which a contract can variate. And should it variate above a certain percentage, yes, I would have also used the issue of the delegation of authority, one. Number two, and the contractor must also know that once you vary it to a certain point, it triggers a new process that maybe one needs to go and retest the market or do a proper benchmark, because you can't keep spending and changing things within a contract. Managing a contract between procurement and the end user is very critical. More often what we do is we do the contract, we finish, we get the end user to run with it, and then when there's a problem, they've overspent and they've changed certain things, we then have a knee-jerk reaction. I think we ought to make sure that within the contract parameters, there are measures to which we measure the end user in the part that they are responsible for, and our part from a monitoring and evaluation perspective, and the spend, because the spend is on us. So we need to look at all of those things. Thanks, Dr. Makon.